One of the choices on the November ballot was sovereign free association. In English, this phrase would be taken to mean the current free association relationship between the U.S. and the three nations of the former U.S.-administered trust territory of the Pacific. However, some are concerned that when this phrase is expressed in Spanish, voters may confuse it with the Spanish phrase for the current Commonwealth or the proposed enhanced Commonwealth. So my question here is for each of you gentlemen. Do you think that this concern about confusion through translation is a valid one?
Yes.
Very good. Your colleagues?
No, I do not believe that creates much confusion. In Puerto Rico, our voters are well educated about the options we have.
Senator?
We have debated this topic long enough.
Very.
That phrase was invented by Puerto Rican colonialists in 1952. They call it Commonwealth here, so it will pass as a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or Massachusetts, and they call it Free Associated State there, in order to confuse the people thinking it was some sort of a sovereign association. But now, 60 years later, obviously nobody's going to be confused by that.
So people are not going to be confused in your view. Very good. Senator Murkowski.
Well, since we're talking about definitions here and whether or not they cause some confusion, Governor, can you define exactly what enhanced Commonwealth really means? Because I'm not sure that I understand it.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. It's a very valid one. A good example of serious consideration by Congress of the enhanced development of Commonwealth may be found in the legislative process between 89 and 91. And during the 1975 ad hoc procedure. But in 1975, a young fellow of the Department of Justice quotes in a letter, "The proposed compact would, without altering the fundamental nature of Puerto Rico's Commonwealth status, provide substantially increased autonomy to the island's government and its people." And we can talk about, for example, that those processes that have been already studied by Congress and by the Commonwealth to see what federal laws apply to Puerto Rico that cannot damage the possibility of economic development of Puerto Rico, or the language in federal courts in Puerto Rico that should be Spanish. That young fellow, the name of that young fellow back in 1975, Mitchell McConnell Jr., minority leader in the Senate.
Governor, what I'm trying to understand is exactly what enhanced Commonwealth is, and because the question really here is whether or not it's consistent with the U.S. Constitution. Now, I understand that your legislature has passed this resolution that when we're talking about the plebiscite, it says incorporates all options, including the enhanced Commonwealth. But if our Department of Justice should determine that enhanced Commonwealth does not, in fact, meet with the definitions within our U.S. Constitution, doesn't fit within that, we've got a situation here where you're going to have a plebiscite that again, is not going to be followed or upheld. So what I'm trying to understand is how we're defining this, and is it consistent with our Constitution?
Again,
because we recognize that there is a challenge there.
Great question, but it's something, as all of us know, who evaluate the constitutionality of something is the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court already resolved this issue. Let's see U.S. versus Lara, the same judge, Mr. Justice Breyer. Third, Congress' statutory goal to modify the degree of autonomy enjoyed by the dependent sovereign that is not a state is not unusual legislative objective. The political branches drawing upon analogous constitutional authority have made adjusting to the autonomous status of other such dependent entities, sometimes making far more radical adjustment than those at issue here. That's a Supreme Court decision. You can, of course it's constitutional, and the Supreme Court has stated that every time that have been asked.
I would suggest that there is still an issue there in terms of the constitutionality, and this is part of what we're dealing with and trying to understand here. Let me ask you a question here, Commissioner Pierluisi. I mentioned in my opening statement that when Alaska was seeking statehood, it was Alaskans engaged, very, very engaged in pushing towards statehood. In fact, at the time that the case was successfully made, it was about over 80% of the Alaskan electorate supported that, an overwhelming majority. Do you think that Congress should consider a statehood petition if the status does not have a majority, let alone a supermajority of the voters?
Well, let me answer it this way. We are driving the process the same way Alaska did back in the 50s. Different times though. This is the 21st century. But we're driving the process. We just held a vote in Puerto Rico. And as I said, plebiscites as elections have consequences. The people rejected the current status. And this is the most democratic nation in the world, and you cannot ignore that vote. You need to respond to that vote. One way of responding is the way that I am proposing in the House, H.R. 2000. It basically lays out statehood for the voters of Puerto Rico and asks for an up or down vote on the admission of Puerto Rico as a state, and then provides the steps that the federal government would take to admit Puerto Rico as a state if that's the wish of the majority of the people of Puerto Rico. But that's driven by Puerto Rico because I represent Puerto Rico in Congress. Now, by the way, you asked a question, and if you allow me, let me quickly answer. What the PDP has been proposing for a long time now is that the relationship between Puerto Rico and the US be based on a compact or treaty that cannot be changed by either party, must be changed by mutual agreement. That in and of itself is unconstitutional. In addition, what they're proposing is that Puerto Rico would keep the same level of federal funding, yet have the ability to decide which federal laws apply in Puerto Rico and which do not. I am sure that many colleagues representing the states would like to have that power as well. That's why, consistently, among other reasons, the federal government, DOJ, as well as this committee and the counterpart committee in the House have said that such proposal is unconstitutional, it violates public policy. The name doesn't change the nature of the status. Puerto Rico is, as a matter of law, an unincorporated territory of the United States. It is called the Commonwealth because the Constitution of Puerto Rico, which was approved by the US Congress, calls the government of Puerto Rico the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So I try to be brief, but I believe that answers your question. They're proposing unconstitutional, an unconstitutional relationship with the US, and that's why it cannot be on the ballot. But the current status, call it as you may, Commonwealth, unincorporated territory, Puerto Rico, call it whatever, was rejected by the people of Puerto Rico. And we've waited long enough. We want Congress to take action.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask Governor Garcia-Padilla, under what you're calling an enhanced Commonwealth, would Puerto Rico be subject to all the federal laws that the Congress, House, and Senate, signed by the President, are passed? Or would you pick and choose which laws under?
No one is trying to mislead you if anyone tell you that we want to pick. What have been studied in 1975 process with approval of the Department of Justice, what was stated to Congress in 1989 to 91 process and passed the House unanimously was a process between Congress and Puerto Rico, and both will agree if there's any federal law that can damage in a different way without damaging the effect of that law in the states, damage the possibility of the economy of Puerto Rico to move on, So it's the process between the Congress and the people of Puerto Rico, not a picking process.
So Governor, what exactly is an enhanced Commonwealth?
Let's go, for example, it has been studied very well. And as I told you, passed the House already once and stayed here in the Senate. We can arrange that a way where federal laws will apply to Puerto Rico, but in a mutual working together with Congress, not Puerto Rico alone. We can talk about federal courts in Puerto Rico, not about the application of the federal court to Puerto Rico, but the language there. The federal court in Puerto Rico is struggling with the language in Puerto Rico because most Puerto Ricans speak Spanish. And there you have two examples. But let me tell you something, Senator. To take Commonwealth out of the ballot is...
Well, I think we've already established...
No, but I didn't answer that.
There's a very clear question on the ballot in November. And people made a decision, and I think we have to respect that decision.
I know, but the Commonwealth wasn't there.
Is
that disenfranchisement?
Well, I would submit that there are four constitutionally valid options here. Commonwealth, independent, statehood, and free association.
I agree.
And in my reading of this ballot, it's fairly clear that the voters rejected Commonwealth status.
Commonwealth was there?
That gives us three remaining choices. And I think, you know, we've sort of danced semantically around this for long enough that we have to move forward and begin to make some decisions here. I want to move on to Commissioner Pierluisi. If you've introduced a bill in the House, I understand, that would just hold a straight up or down vote on statehood. If what people are saying about the intent of voters who left their ballots blank, that's a fairly risky proposition. But obviously, you believe that that's the best way to get a very clear idea of how people feel on statehood. Say that vote comes out favorably to what you want to see, and the voters in Puerto Rico vote yes. What would walk us through the next steps? Because obviously that doesn't result immediately in statehood. Of all the steps we have to walk through to actually see that come to fruition and see Puerto Rico become a state.
The bill provides that the president shall submit an admission, a bill admitting Puerto Rico as a state within the period of 180 days. The bill should include a transition period during which additional federal monies would flow into Puerto Rico and federal contributions would be gradually applied. The Congress, the bill then provides that Congress is committed to act on the legislation and so admit Puerto Rico. The bill, as it says in its first sentence, sets forth the process for admitting Puerto Rico as a state of the Union. So it is an admission bill, and it provides that process that I just laid out for you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, indeed.
I would like to add a couple of points.
Please.
Since they've had plenty of time.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, nobody knows what enhanced Commonwealth means. They've been trying to define it for half a century. Nobody knows. So the answer is nobody knows. This is just juridical hocus pocus, juridical bull, to put it in plain English. So you shouldn't stress the point anymore because they won't define it. In definition is their name for the territory, and the territory has been repudiated by 54% of the Puerto Rican people. Now it has transmuted itself into tyranny. So it seems to me here, since you want information to take positive steps ahead, we're in the middle of a discussion similar to those held in the Middle Ages where people ask how many angels fit into a needle's head. You won't approve anything that says even indirectly you will accept statehood. So as long as statehood is in this bill or your bill, nothing will happen. And as long as Commonwealth remains, we remain a colony. a territory. It's about time you start speaking frankly to the Puerto Rican people, telling them what are the conditions under which you would accept, if you could accept statehood, refuse to consider colonialism any longer, and make a reasonable offer between our inalienable right to govern ourselves, either under independence or on any other formula of a non-territorial nature. If it's statehood, state the conditions for statehood. If it's free association, state the conditions for free association. That's the way to go. If not, we're losing our time once more in this Senate, the Senate's time and our time.
Recognizing the perils of asking for a yes or no answer, I'm going to try once more on an issue that I do think that there's some common ground, and I hope that there is. Governor, we'll start with you. Should the ballot question under the President's proposal be simplified to statehood, yes or no, or sovereignty, yes or no?
No, I want to tell you why. First, take Commonwealth out of the ballot is a way to disenfranchise the majority of the people of Puerto Rico that have voted for the Commonwealth every time the Commonwealth have been in the ballot. This time, Commonwealth wasn't there. Second, I'm not pro-independence, as you know. But I have to protect the right of the pro-independence people to have their option in the ballot. You're welcome. And I'm not pro-statehood. That will make Puerto Rico a Latino ghetto. And I have to defend the pro-statehooders to have their option in the ballot. I cannot disenfranchise them. It's not payback time for me because I was disenfranchised in November. And what the pro-statehood party is asking you, Chairman, and this committee, is to be accomplice of that democratic crime against democracy. Take the one who won. Always the people have been asked out of the ballot because if the Commonwealth is in the ballot, they have no way to win.
Governor, the reason that I asked the question was leaders in your party have endorsed statehood, yes or no, for this committee in 2010 and in hearings before the House Resources Committee in 2009, and that's why it's relevant. Let me get,
but let me add
your colleagues.
No, but let me add something, Senator. People in pro-statehood party have expressed that they are not agree with the yes or no for statehood, a process. So that's a democracy.
What your leaders in the past endorsed was framing the issue statehood, yes or no, and that's a matter of public record. So let me just get your colleagues into this, and let me have the other senators ask any remaining questions.
I'll be brief. By definition, when you pose a question as a yes or no question, you're not excluding anybody. Because whoever is in support of the proposition can vote yes, and whoever is against can vote no. So it's to talk about excluding anybody when you're posing an up or down question, it's just nonsensical. Now, whether we can use the $2.5 million for consulting the people of Puerto Rico on the potential admission of Puerto Rico as a state, of course, we can. It is consistent with the language of the appropriation because it is directed to resolving the issue of Puerto Rico status, and definitely one of the options through which you can solve this problem is by admitting Puerto Rico as a state. The other option I do not support because there's no support for majority support. You cannot even argue there's anything close to it for Puerto Rico becoming a national, treated as a sovereign nation. But again, I would say that if somebody proposes that vote, what's going to happen is that the overwhelming majority of Puerto Ricans will vote against. So I wouldn't say that I'm being excluded as a statehooder. I would simply vote no if the question is the second one that you posed.
Senator?
Well, the state...
Or sovereignty, yes or no? The question.
Excuse me. A statehood, first, a statehood yes or no referendum stemming from this Congress is an impossible proposition. You will never get passed through even this committee. I can assure you that. through 30 years of experience, the United States will never make such an offer. So that's out of the question. Now, regarding the second question, we have an inalienable right to independence under international law. If you are willing to make a statement publicly and push through a status referendum where you offer independence with a reasonable transition, as it should be for your benefit and for our benefit, of course I would accept independence, yes or no referendum.
Let's do this. I'm going to let my colleagues ask any additional questions and then give my assessment of where we are at this point. I will tell you, I thought it was particularly noteworthy, giving some of the history, Senator Murkowski. In fact, the current Senator Murkowski knows a little bit about this because in 2001, the U.S. Department of Justice wrote to the former chairman of this committee, who was Senator Murkowski's father, Frank Murkowski, with the finding that enhanced Commonwealth is inconsistent with the Constitution. So this debate's been running a little while.
Long while.
Senator Murkowski, the current Senator Murkowski.
Let me ask you a question, Senator Barrios, because you brought up the issue of self-determination, the right of all peoples to self-determination. But then in response to another colleague here, you indicated that, look, we here in Congress should just set out these conditions. You've said territorial status is out, it should be dropped, that the option for statehood is unrealistic. But if we were to basically provide these conditions to you, isn't that just another form of Washington, D.C. dictating to Puerto Rico whether it's the level of status or the conditions? How does that address this right of self-determination that you've spoken of?
Senator Murkowski, when you came into Puerto Rico in 1998, you asked nobody. You just invaded, I don't mean you. You were a territory.
Thank you.
The United States invaded Puerto Rico and consulted nobody. Under the law, international law, you should devolve our powers so we can exercise our free determination. That is not going to happen, of course. You will only do that when you have no other option. We accept that statehood be put in a plebiscite in the future after the United States, if it's through a congressional, if the United States is willing to spell out the conditions for statehood.
And you don't think that that's then dictating in violation of your
No, because
right to self-determination?
Because the only right you have as a nation, not as Alaskans, nor as Hawaiians, nor as Texans, as a nation, the only right is a right to independence juridically. We know we are not the majority in Puerto Rico. What we say is that if a referendum is going to be held through an act of Congress, independence has to be included with a transitional period which should be included in independence, and if any other option is going to be included through an act of Congress, reassociation or statehood, then you should spell out whether you are willing to grant that once it is approved. Because once independence wins a referendum, there's no option. You have to act upon a petition for independence. We're in the 21st century, not in 1898. That's what I mean.
Could I comment? I'm going to try to be brief. The same way you cannot impose statehood on Puerto Rico. We, the American citizens of Puerto Rico, cannot impose statehood on you. Definitely, you can lay out the terms and conditions for statehood. But by the way, we're not seeking a special statehood for Puerto Rico. It would be statehood on equal footing with the 50 other states. The only terms and conditions that you would be laying out would be, for example, the transition period. Because this doesn't have to happen overnight. You can provide for a 6-year transition period, 8-year transition period, in which you would gradually give us parity. We don't have parity, equal treatment in federal programs. At the same time, you would gradually impose federal taxes on the island, income taxes. So that's the only aspect that under which we could have a different treatment than the states, and it would only last during the transition period. But of course, you're not, it's like for a change of status to happen, two things must happen. Congress must provide for it, and the people of Puerto Rico must accept it. So you cannot detract yourself from the process. You have to be engaged, and we're driving the process in the sense that we already held a plebiscite. We can, very much so, morally and legally do it. And we're telling you, act on it, respond to it.
Senator, permit me for a moment.
Senator.
There's one condition for statehood, which the Resident Commission hasn't mentioned. It's Senator Moynihan's question. Do Puerto Ricans know they have to become Americans in order to become a state of the Union? Or do they want their own separate identity? That's beyond economic transition. It deals with the way of being, the nature of being Puerto Rican. That's called a nationality under international law. We are a distinct nationality. Do we want to continue as a distinct nationality? Congress should be clear. Like Senator Moynihan, who was an expert on this matter. If you want to become a state of the Union, you have to become Americans. You cannot maintain your separate identity in the long run. That's a condition also which should be spelled out.
Senator Heinrich.
Senator Barrios, following up on that idea, what would you think of a ballot that first asks up front, should Puerto Rico be part of the United States? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then you choose on the second tier between statehood and the current status, Commonwealth status.
Of course not, because you cannot exclude independence in any valid plebiscite.
If they say no,
but you can.
Then you go and you choose between independence and free association.
Being part of the United States or not doesn't include independence. Independence means independence.
Right? No, I recognize that. I agree with you. But if the people of Puerto Rico vote no, we should not be part of the United States, then then you.
It's not being part of the United States. It's independence. It's a positive, like the United States. You are independent. You have a right as a nation to be independent. We are a colony of the United States. What you can ask us is whether we want to become independent or not. That you can ask. Not whether we want to be part of the United States. Of course we don't want to be part of the United States as a colony. The stateholders don't want it, neither do we want it.
Commissioner, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, my reaction is that if you pose a question like that, probably 80 to 90% of the people will say that they want Puerto Rico to continue to be part of the United States. Actually, legally, if we go by the Supreme Court precedent, it's not technically part. It's just
belongs to.
It belongs to. It is a possession or territory of the United States. But the answer would be overwhelming. The same way, as I said before, if you pose a question, national sovereignty, yes or no, I'm telling you, the overwhelming majority are going to go vote against national sovereignty. And to react to something that Senator Barrios just told you, we are proud American citizens. I know, I respect my fellow independentistas, from Puerto Rico. I do respect them and their ideal, but, we're proud American citizens. If you poll in Puerto Rico whether people want to continue having their American citizenship, it's going to be like 80 or 90% again. So votes should be meaningful. That question to me is not meaningful because we already know the answer to it.
Senator. Of course we respect independent people. Everybody in the world, The question is whether the world respects or Commonwealth. Of course. And I'm very glad that after 60 years of persecution of the independence forces, now we have the right to speak, this is all, we'll blabber on. Nothing is going to happen here. Nothing is. You will not act, I repeat, don't fool yourself. You will not act as long as statehood is a possibility offered. You will not act, but you have to act to decolonize. Think about it. How do you do it? How do you decolonize without including statehood as one of the alternatives? Senator Pierluisi's resident commissioner's bill will go nowhere. These meetings, we're grateful, but they'll go nowhere either.
Governor, you wanted to add something?
Yes, Senator, thank you. Precisely on the White House Task Force report, they suggest the idea of a two-question referendum on if we want to remain part of the United States, being the Commonwealth and the statehood, the alternative, and if not, independence or sovereign, being not part. The two options that win will go to a second question. And we endorse that. But let me tell you, let me go further. To exclude, let's say, for the sake of argument, that Commonwealth and what they call current territorial status is the same, and we have to exclude that. Statehood lose in 93, in 98, in 67, and we are not proposing to exclude statehood because they lose. Exclude the Commonwealth from the ballot is disenfranchisement. That's why I in favor of including all the formulas, or the ballot formulas, or the ballot options in the ballot. And I think that fairness. The majority of the people of Puerto Rico have been voting for Commonwealth every time the Commonwealth is in the ballot. And now they want to take it, disenfranchise the majority of Puerto Rico. I know that you, Senator, not the chairman, not Senator Markowski, will talk Plessy. And that will be talking Plessy.
Talking what?
Plessy versus Ferguson.
Let me give you my assessment of where we are. First, gentlemen, you should know that this committee's made a special focus on trying to resolve issues that I usually characterize as running longer than the Trojan War. They just kind of go on and on and on, and we've had some success in a number of areas. A few weeks ago, there was a report in one of the newspapers that we had sent more bills to the floor of the United States Senate than all the other committees together. So that's because we try to find common ground. We are going to need your leadership here in order to do that. And let me give you my take in terms of where we are. I think we've made some progress. 2 out of 3 of you seem to believe that the current status and enhanced Commonwealth are no longer options. They're no longer options on the table. 2 out of 3 of you. So, looking forward, it seems to me that it's especially important to see if the 3 of you can come to an agreement on the language of a ballot that, in effect, has 2 remaining options. Statehood or sovereignty as an independent, freely associated state. And absent an agreement of the 3 of you, it seems that this will just go round and round some more. So we very much look forward to working with you. I'm sure that the people of Puerto Rico want this, resolved, and we are interested in working constructively and closely with you. So, unless Senator Murkowski wants to add anything else, or Senator Heinrich, we'll just let Senator Murkowski's going to have the last word.
Well, I don't mean to have the last word,
sure.
but I wanted to share with you a thought that I just shared with the chairman here in reflecting on Alaska's statehood fight. It was a 90-plus year fight. And I'm reminded that it took us 90 years to get to statehood, and for us the only decision was up or down on statehood. And the fact that Puerto Rico has been engaged in this issue for also many, many decades, but the fact that you have as many options as you do makes it perhaps even more difficult than Alaska faced when it was just an up or down. And as I would agree with the chairman, that the process for determining what the options will be on the ballot and how they are defined is as critical as anything that we have discussed here today. So it's a challenge to you and those that you represent to try to address how we define what the options are and then how they would therefore be defined on this ballot moving forward. So I thank the chairman and certainly thank you gentlemen for leading the discussion here this morning.
Gentlemen, thank you. As you can see, senators here, both political parties want to work closely with you and get this resolved. And with that, the Energy Committee is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, I mean,